Jesus moments, it's defined like this in the Urban Dictionary. It says, an aha moment, moment of decision, moment of truth, critical moment, moment of reassessment of priorities, turning point in life, life-changing moment. I've had probably a few of those. Hopefully we've all had some of those in life. I think one of the things that comes to mind when I think of come to Jesus moments is I think about some of my experiences riding a motorcycle. Because it's at those moments where you realize you could have just met Jesus sometimes. I think of one, I was on my way to school, and I lived down a long country road. It was 30 minutes to get to school if you went the speed limit. But I had my first vehicle that I owned was a Kawasaki Ninja. It was a motorcycle, sport bike. And my record getting to school was 15 minutes. And I went too fast. But I was on my way to school one time, and as you got close to town, I lived out where there's almost nobody, but there was a subdivision as you got close to town, and it was right in a curve, and there was always lots of cars coming out, but they had a stop sign. They were supposed to stop. They didn't often stop. But I was taking this curve about 60, which was well above the speed limit, and sure enough, a truck pulls right out in front of me. And in this curve, you've got the driving lane that I'm in, you got a turn lane that comes this way to turn into the subdivision, you got another outside lane. Now, it wasn't the first time somebody's pulled out in front of me. Usually I would just swerve into the turn lane, finish my curve, and keep on going, and just pass them. This time, there was a car in the outside lane, a car in the turn lane, and a truck that just pulled out in front of me. So I had to, in the middle of a curve, swerve, straighten up, go in between the cars, and then finish the curve. And that was my first motorcycle coming to Jesus moment, where it makes you reevaluate your life's decisions, right? Like, should I have been going that fast? Unfortunately, I didn't learn my lesson. And so later, I don't know how much later, but I was riding my motorcycle to town again, taking a different road because it was curvy and I liked it. And I was trying to take the curves as fast as I could. So there was 90 to 100 miles an hour around some of these curves. And which the reason for a sports bike, if you don't know, is because they feel amazing in curves if you're going way too fast. And so I was taking these curves and I realized my back tire felt a little spongy, it was a little soft in those curves. And I thought, wow, that doesn't seem right. I'll just check it when I get to town. Well, I got to the stop sign right as I was getting to town, and I got off, and I looked. My rear tire was completely flat, had several holes in it. It was about to come apart. And I thought, wow, I should really reevaluate my life choices. But I didn't. Later, much later, when I was older, I bought a Ducati, an even faster sports bike. Because that's just what I needed when I was, early 30s with kids and all that. And I was living in Fairview at the time. I just went and saw the eye doctor, Dr. Cole at East Vancouver Eye Clinic, and I was on my way back to my house. So I was coming down, I guess it's I-20. It's 205, thinking of Texas. Coming down 205, and I was exiting to get on 84 to head out toward Fairview. And I was taking this little curve, the little ramp that goes down at about 70 miles an hour. In this curve, and it's a nice little curve. And I was taking it, and I was thinking, wow, I'm really kind of pushing it here. And then as I was in the curve, I felt my rear tire roll over a rock, and then it kind of reset and caught. I was like, oh, wow, I could have just died. At that time, I decided, I think I need to sell the motorcycle. So I did. I sold it because I thought, well, I'm either going to go to jail as the preacher, or I'm going to leave my kids without a father. So I sold the motorcycle, and I decided if I get another one, it probably won't be a sports bike, right? But we come to these moments in our life where we need to make a decision to change, and that's exactly why Jesus came to Israel. It's why he came to the Jews. It was quite literally a come to Jesus moment. He was calling those who were lost back to himself and calling his people back to God, because it wasn't that they didn't believe in God, it's that their practices were no longer of God. And he was trying to draw them back and help them to recognize their Messiah and come back to relationship with God. And Jesus is confronting them pretty directly as we get into this portion of the gospel. And it's because this is where Jesus is getting really close to where he's going to be dying for all of us. And his ministry is coming to an end, so his opportunity to call them back, at least himself in person, is coming to an end. So it gets really intense as we get to this portion of the Bible. And so we're going to be taking a look at a few spots. And the first thing we're going to look at is the triumphal entry. It was part of our scripture reading this morning, where Jesus, he's coming into Jerusalem, his final entrance in Jerusalem, and he knows that he's going to die. The people, they don't know this. As he's coming, it's this very glorious moment, right, where Jesus is heading into town. He's approaching Bethphage and Bethany, and he's near the Mount of Olives, and he sends two of his disciples into town. He tells them, goes into this village. He says, go find a colt. There's a colt tied up on a post. It's never been ridden. Bring it back to me. And if they say anything to you while you're trying to get it, say that the Lord has need of it. And that's what he sends his disciples off. So I think this was challenging the faith of his disciples, but also designed to build their faith, because they do this exact thing. They go into town, they find a colt tied up, just like Jesus said, and they begin to untie it and take it. And to many, it would appear they're stealing this colt. And the owner comes and says, what are you doing with my colt? And they say, the Lord has need of it. And he allows them to take it, right? So that should build the faith of their disciples, and they take it to Jesus, and Jesus begins to ride this colt into town. And he's coming to town, and they're laying the clothes down for him to do that. And then as he gets closer to town, people are getting excited. And they're spreading their coats and their garments on the ground in front of him, which is significant because these people may not have more than one. And they're putting these things down. And as he's approaching near the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples, they begin glorifying God joyfully. And they begin, because of the miracles. Now, if you remember, it wasn't covered in Luke's gospel, but this is shortly after Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead. Jesus had just done a major miracle, right? And they're shouting for joy because of the miracles. And they're shouting, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. So they're acknowledging him as King and Messiah. And they say, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Now the Pharisees are upset. They were upset when he brought Lazarus down from the dead. They've been looking for opportunities to catch him and destroy him now, but they're scared of the people. And so the Pharisees tell him, teacher, rebuke your disciples, right? Because what they're doing to Jesus is bordering on worship. And it's also, they're calling him king. And they're not supposed to be calling Jesus king. And so the Pharisees are upset because they're honoring Jesus. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are not getting their honor that they were expecting, that the honor that they received every year as the Passover came and people came to Jerusalem. The teachers of the law were highly esteemed. And this year, all the focus was on Jesus. And they were upset about it. But Jesus tells them, I tell you for sure that even if they do become silent, these rocks, the stones themselves will cry out. He's saying, there's nothing that's going to stop this. Nothing that's going to stop what's happening. And it's this moment that seems, as far as those that are following Jesus and for Jesus, it should be this moment of great joy and excitement. That people are excited. And you would think Jesus is really excited because it's the culmination of his ministry. But at the same time, Jesus knows he's going there to die. And so what we see when Jesus approached Jerusalem is instead of this glee and this joy we may expect of a king who's being welcomed by his people, Jesus begins to weep. And he weeps over Jerusalem. And this is what he says, beginning of verse 42. He says, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. For the day will come upon you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Because they had their come to Jesus moment when Jesus came to them and asked them to come to him, and they rejected it. And Jesus is weeping because he knows that's going to happen. And he knows these people are going to suffer because of their choice. And so as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, because he knows the truth. He knows he's not kicking the Romans out and setting up this earthly kingdom. He knows he's coming to die to establish a spiritual kingdom. And he knows part of that is being rejected by his own people and the judgment that will fall on him. Jesus is weeping. It doesn't feel like victory yet in that moment, because he's so concerned about the souls of the people that he's there to save. And so then Jesus goes into town, and he gets to the temple, right? And Jesus enters the temple, and they may also be expecting this to be a glorious moment where Jesus, the one who are thinking the King and the Messiah is entering the temple, they're expecting when Jesus comes into Rome to kick out the Jews and to kick out the Romans and establish a kingdom for the Jews. But instead, Jesus comes with rebuke, and the rebuke is not for the Romans. The rebuke is for the spiritual leaders. They thought he was coming to kick out the Romans. Instead, he rebuked the religious leaders for their hypocrisy. And it begins here in verse 45. He goes in and he begins to drive out those who were selling animals in the temple. And he says to them, "It is written, and my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." And so he rebukes them for their practices. And he begins to teach daily in the temple. But the chief priests and scribes and the leading men among the people were trying to destroy him. And they could not find anything that they might do, for all the people were hanging on his every word. So the people were loving Jesus, and the leaders couldn't stand it because they wanted to destroy him, but they couldn't even destroy him because they knew that they would be attacked and killed possibly by the crowd. In fact, that's exactly what they say they're afraid of as we get into chapter 20. When they come and they question Jesus' authority, they say, "By what power, by what authority are you doing these things? By what authority are you casting out demons? Are you raising the dead? By what authority are you casting our people out of the temple just because they're selling? How are you telling us that we're wrong?" And Jesus, instead of answering their question, he asks them a question. He says, "Well, you tell me this. Was John the Baptist from God, or was he from man?" But they realized if they said he was from man, then they would be in trouble because they didn't go out to be baptized. But if they said he was from God, but they were afraid if they said he was from man or not from God, then they were afraid the people would stone him because they believed John the Baptist to be a prophet. So you've got this interesting dynamic where the leaders of Israel are afraid of their own people because the people are so wrapped up and so drawn to what God has been doing, beginning with John the Baptist and the ministry of Jesus, right? They've been, if you read through the book of Luke, one of the words I told you to look for is the word of awe or amazement, because it's all through the book of Luke. They're amazed and they're in awe with what God has been doing. And then Jesus begins to tell this parable to the Pharisees. In verse 9, we get the parable of the vine growers. Again, Jesus is giving them another come to Jesus moment. This is your opportunity to make a change. This is your opportunity to do something different. And so he begins to tell this parable. He tells the parable of a man who planted a vineyard, and then he went on a long journey. So he rented it out to vine growers. And the way that would work is vine growers would come and they would grow and they would work in this vineyard, and then they would give the owner of the vineyard a portion of the produce. They would have a portion and he would have a portion, right? And so the man goes on a long journey, and then he sends a servant to go get his portion of the produce. Well, the first slave that he sends comes to them, and they beat the slave and send him out with nothing. So he sends another slave, and they beat him, and they also send him out with nothing. So he sends a third slave, and the third slave goes to collect what rightfully belongs to the master. It says they injure him. So they beat him more severely and send him out. Now, you probably already picked up on the imagery that the vineyard that Jesus is referencing it's Israel. It's the nation of Israel. And it's God's people. And the vine growers were the leaders of Israel that God established through the law, right? The priests and the leaders of Israel and those who were supposed to take care of God's vineyard. and they were supposed to produce fruit, but when God came to receive his fruit, there was none to be given. And they beat the prophets, right? The ones that came to call them back to God. They beat the prophets, and they gave God no fruit. So then, in the story, the vine growers decide, the vineyard owner says, okay, well, I will send my son. Surely they will respect my son. Just like God sent Jesus, right? That's the connection. And so he sends his son to these vine growers, and these vine growers, they see that the son was sent. And but verse 14 says, but when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, this is the heir. Let us kill him also, so that the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then, Jesus asked, what then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. And so Jesus is saying, just like you're going to kill me, just like those vine growers killed the son of the vineyard owner, God has sent his son to you. And if you reject me and you kill me, then God is going to give the vineyard to others. And that's a reference to Gentiles. And so then he says he will come and he will destroy the vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. Now, when the Pharisees heard this, when they heard it, they said, may it never be, because they understood. They understood what Jesus was saying. And Jesus looked at them and said, what then is this that is written? A stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. Everyone who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter them like dust. Those who stumble over the cornerstone, Jesus, are going to fall and be broken to pieces. Jesus, this is judgment. This is the final warning that he's giving these people another warning that they're going to pay for not honoring the Son, right? But it's also their last moment to make a change. And so when we look at this, this time of Jesus, this great triumphal entry of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, rather than it being this glorious moment of him taking a kingdom, it's this moment where he's pleading with these people and warning these people and trying to get them to understand that God loves them and God wants them to have every opportunity to come into relationship, but we have to come to Jesus. We can't have Jesus come to us. They wanted Jesus to come be who they expected him to be, because he wasn't who they wanted him to be. They rejected him. And many people in the world do the same thing. They may believe in God, but they want God to accept them where they're at and how they are. They don't want to change. They don't want to come to Jesus. They want God to come to them and allow them to live their life and accept them the way that they are, ignoring the fact that Jesus died for the very sins that they strive to continue to live in. And so, for us, when we think about our lives, we need to recognize that it's time to come to Jesus. That may mean, for somebody that's never been in relationship with God, never been saved, that may mean believing and becoming baptized and beginning the journey. But for many of us, like those leaders in Israel, we believe in God. But maybe we're not being faithful to God with our actions. And maybe we need to wake up before we face Jesus truly, and it's too late. Again, a come to Jesus moment. It's an aha moment of decision, moment of truth. It's a critical moment of reassessment of priorities, a turning point, a life-changing moment. Here's a couple questions we should ask ourselves. What needs to change in my life? The truth is, none of us have it all together. None of us have it all figured out, me included. Nobody's got it all figured out. So we have to assess what needs to change in my life. What do I need to successfully make the change? It's also an important question. It's one thing to recognize the problem. It's another thing to begin to think about what you need to solve it. we can't solve every problem on our own. Sometimes we need help from others. Sometimes we need counseling. Sometimes we need encouragement. Sometimes we need a friend. We need boundaries. We need someone to walk with us. We need to decide what we need. And then we need to take the first step today. This moment where Jesus goes into Jerusalem and challenges the Jews can be viewed as harsh and judgmental. But what we got to understand is it was an act of love, because Jesus wanted more than anything for God's people to be faithful and not to fall under judgment. That's why Jesus gave them the warning. That's why Jesus drove them out of the temple. He wanted them to wake up, to come to a moment of decision, to have a come to Jesus moment. And for us, we need to have those moments in our life too. We need to decide that this is the time and this is the place where I'm going to make a change. I think about me and my health, right? I keep thinking, well, at some point I'm going to eat better. At some point I'm going to get back and start exercising again. And I'm afraid that it's going to take a come to Jesus moment where I get a cancer diagnosis or I get some other, diabetes or something like that. And it shouldn't have to come to that. Our bodies give us all kind of warnings that things aren't the way they should be. And we need to heed those things. Just like Scripture gives us all kinds of warnings that the fruit in our life is not what it should be. And if we're wise, we'll take action before we have to face consequences. If there's any way that we can help you this morning or anything we can do for you, please come as we stand and sing.